Thank you so much for having me. About a week ago, I got a phone call from a man in Los Angeles who said he was from the TV show Angels Among Us. And he said they'd been given my name, that I was someone who had had contact with an angel that had changed my life. And he said, would you be interested in being on our show? I said, sure. So he said, you were in contact with an angel, right? And I said, well, actually, I didn't think of it that way. I felt I was in contact with a light being. And he said, well, that'll pass. So then he said, and it was life-changing, right? And I said, absolutely. And he said, well, how so? And I said, well, I was raised in a science-minded family. I had a father and 4 brothers who were all very bright in science and math and logical thinking and analysis, and a mother who was also extremely bright in that as well as more mystical things. But I said I was definitely raised to be science-like, be logical, be intelligent, don't be weird, be respectable because you're scientific. And I said, definitely my experience with this light being opened my vision to realize that there's lots of truth that science simply hasn't validated, and there's no time for it in my lifetime. And so yes, I was changed. And let's see. He got all excited and said, that's just perfect. That's just perfect for what we want for our audience. We want someone who was really changed. And I said, yeah, I went on to get a PhD in public health at the University of Oregon in Eugene, Oregon. And I was a professor for years until I basically got the calling to leave that and do remote viewing with physicist Russell Targ for 10 years. I knew when I was getting my PhD that it was simply something to get to learn about research, learn how social science research is done. I knew I wouldn't be using it for sort of a straight job for the rest of my life, but I had no idea I was going to start doing remote viewing and get into parapsychological research. So the guy was all excited and he said, great, I'm going back and I'll tell our head woman who's the director of the show that you'd be great for the show. And he said, I'll call you tomorrow. And he did call me tomorrow and he said, oh, I'm so sorry. He said, when was that near-death experience you had? And I said, well, that was in 1974 when I was in my early 20s. And he said, that disqualifies you. He said, we want people for the show who've had contact with an angel in the last 10 years. And he said, gee, you had passed our screening. So he says, I just don't understand it because I have here that you had contact with an angel in the years 2003 and 4, 5, 6. I said, oh, that also wasn't an angel in my point of view. I think that was the spirit of my partner's daughter, Dr. Elizabeth Targ, who dropped her body in 2002 and immediately started communicating with me. I said, launching me into the area of after-death communications. I said, but she wasn't an angel either. Great person, and I love her dearly. But he said, well, that would qualify. He said, I really want you on the show because you were science-minded and these direct experiences really did change you. I said, absolutely. I became absolutely unequivocal knower that when we drop our bodies, we exist, we continue to exist, that people who do that, some of them are able to contact us when we're totally awake, not in active grief, we're surprised by it, and they're able to give us information that does change our lives. He said, oh, she gave you information that changed your life. I said, oh, definitely. He said, well, give me an example. And I said, well, I was living right here in Durham at the time. I had been diagnosed by 3 different doctors at UNC and Duke as having multiple sclerosis because I had all kinds of nervous system abnormalities, twitching and losing my balance and ringing in my ears and joint pain and things. And I said, I didn't believe I had multiple sclerosis because I had so much pain in various parts of my body and that didn't match the criteria for multiple sclerosis. I said, but after all these doctors just insisted I had it, and they said you need to start the medication right away because you have an overactive immune system that's causing you this illness. I was very, very depressed, went to bed that night, and was awakened in the night by the spirit of Dr. Elizabeth Targ telling me, Jane, you have Lyme disease. So the guy was totally excited, and he says, "Great, that works for us. She saved your life." I said, "I believe she did, and she saved other people's lives as well from the other side." So he calls me back the next day and says, "Oh, I'm so disappointed. The director says you won't qualify." I said, "Well, why?" He says, "Because you were already weird to start with." And he said, we went to your website and saw that after 1974, your near-death experience, you became a healer, and you believed in life after death, and you'd already had contact with a light being, so we don't think that our television audience will be able to identify with you. You were already way out there. So I said, yes, having a near-death experience tends to really change us, and so I thought that was pretty funny. But so I'm here to tell you, I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm here to tell you about the science of consciousness that comes to us from India, because I was amped up and vibed up in my near-death experience, and my energy field was totally changed, became incredibly sensitive to vibrations, to electromagnetic fields, and I was given instructions that I was going to be a spiritual healer when I came back to life, and this was not something I wanted to do at all. This was 1974. I wanted to be, a professor. I wanted to be rational. I wanted to be acceptable to the university and to my family and to all my friends in graduate school, and this was just not something that little Jane down here wanted to do. I was lucky enough in the coming years I did become a healer. I did it on the off hours when I wasn't teaching at the university. Got myself in a lot of trouble for that. But in 1995, I was lucky enough to be introduced to the teachings from India, which in this country calls it Indian mysticism. In India, they don't call it that. They call it the science of consciousness. They say that it's the laws that govern other dimensions and humanity's capacity and calling to actually realize that we are organs of higher consciousness. That's what we're doing here. We don't die. We're incomplete as we are. We took a body, in fact, to evolve as conscious spiritual beings. In India, they use the word conscious instead of spiritual. They say we're conscious entities that have no form. And in this country, it's mostly called, we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. In any case, I thought the most important thing I could share with you is what I've learned from my time in India. I've been in India a number of months. How it relates to people who've had near-death experiences, and especially the ones who became healers, the ones who became sensitive and psychic, the ones who've had their value system change, which is about all of us. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what is some of the evidence from science that humanity can participate in their own evolution, that who we are is not physical actually, that's just a small part of who we are, but that we're multi-level organisms, and a great aspect of who we are is what science calls nonlocal, or non-physical, unlimited by space and time. And then I want to talk about something that I didn't understand until pretty recently in my life as a healer, I would say really since 1995. Why do people who want to be healers, or people who've come back from their near-death experience amped up have a practice of inner-directed attention with still mind and stability in order to balance our energy and in order to infuse our field of energy with power so that we're able to be healthy and reliable healers. So I didn't, we call that meditation. My particular teacher that I'll be talking to you a little bit about called it self-inquiry and made some distinctions different between that and any other type of meditation. But you're free to believe what you want, and I'm just sharing with you how I've learned what's necessary for my life. Okay, so I'm going to begin with giving you some general concepts from the science of consciousness, and you can just think about it. There's one energy which permeates the cosmos, visible and invisible, gross and subtle, at different levels of being and different levels of consciousness. So right from the start, they're talking about different levels of consciousness. What is a human being? Well, they don't say that we're physical bodies. We're vortex fields of consciousness vibrating in matter at specific pitch and frequency. All living forms evolve and grow through the stimulating effect of the vibration from a higher source of life. So this obviously deviates from Western science. Okay? So I know that many NDEers have experienced being energetically amped up, and I believe that this change in the power and vibratory rate of our radiant energy is an aspect of higher consciousness. I believe people who've had near-death experiences in the light have had an experience, a glimpse of the future of humanity and what we ought to be working towards while we're here. The development of the human being consists of passing from one state of consciousness to another, sequentially and in stages, through a series of shifting values. We share with the animals instinctual values. That's what drives us, from the time we're an infant to a toddler. And we take on emotional values, trying to meet our emotional needs. As we mature as conscious beings, our values become intellectual. We try to develop our intelligent mind, our analytical mind. And then the next stage of humanity, because what I was surprised to learn, having been brought up to do well in school and be very good with analytical intelligence, I was surprised to find out that's not the ceiling of human ability at all. At all. And that the next stage is for humans to enter into a process of consciously participating in our own evolution of consciousness. That involves the intentional direction of our attention for transforming our entire way of being. It's not just transforming what our mind does or how our mind works, which a lot of people perceive as consciousness. It transforms our entire way of being in the world and includes changing the frequency and power and activity of the field that we radiate. Now, for those of you who've read Eckhart Tolle's books about the power of now and a new earth, this is what he's talking about. He's talking about how humanity is evolving quite rapidly right now, and we here are on the forefront of it. And it does involve becoming aware of your power of now, or what's called your radiating presence, or your field of radiating spiritual power. One of my teachers is Alice Bailey, great spiritual teacher, active in the 20s up until the late 40s. She wrote many, many books. They are obviously did not come from her ego, from her learning. She says they were dictated to her by a Tibetan who was over in the Himalayan mountains, and that he was dictating these books to her by ESP. I don't really recommend her books to the average reader. They're like most spiritual teachings, including A Course in Miracles. You have understandable information all mixed in with stuff that you cannot understand. It's very purposeful. In my opinion, why? Because only the dedicated will stick with it, and because we're called to, because we have a yearning to know. It's meant to confound the analytical mind. All spiritual teachings of this nature are meant to stop our mind so we can hear with our heart. And so Alice Bailey's teachings are that same way. And, you know, I was surprised when I encountered her book called Esoteric Healing. She says, all that we can know of God or a person is the quality of his or her energy as it demonstrates in force and activity. So she's not just talking about healers here, she's talking about all humans. She predicted in the next century, humans will undergo a rapid shift in evolution in which they will learn to use the mind in new ways, especially in the wielding of energy, which, as it vitalizes and animates the etheric body, influences our effect on others through radiation. Humans will learn dexterity in the reception, handling, direction, and transmission of energies for spiritual purposes. So I believe many people who've had near-death experiences are on the forefront of this new way of being, of working with energy. And the start of it is we have to learn how to balance our own energy, how to let our own fields become infused with spiritual power so that we can then radiate it into the world and lift the consciousness of the world. So this man, many people who study spirituality or evolution of consciousness or evolved souls feel that this man, Ramana Maharshi, who lived from 1879 to 1950, many people feel he was one of the most evolved humans to be on the planet. And why is that? And it's also why he's my teacher. It's because his teaching was in silence. He said, my major teaching is in silence. He said, the U.S. is filled with preachers who want you to memorize things and want you to learn specific rituals and have specific beads and say specific prayers. But he says, my teaching is in silence. Now, in his later life, he said, if you can't hear my teaching in silence, I'll use words. And so after he spent more than 10 years in total silence, the reason he had such a profound effect on people is because without any words at all, if you came at all near where he was, people got catapulted into bliss and into a feeling of just loving and peace and being there. They didn't ever want to leave. They didn't want to leave. And of course, Westerners who came, we had no understanding what was going on. How could this be possible? So anyway, this is Ramana Maharshi. I'm glad to introduce you. He was not teaching any religion. At some point, he actually said, Jesus Christ was one of us, but they don't know that there, and that's okay. But, you know, he said Jesus was teaching about the evolution of humanity and that he had been definitely influenced by evolved souls from India. And in India, they do believe Jesus was not the first evolved soul and that he was not the last. And in fact, he was telling people, all of us, this is where we want to all go. And, you know, his disciples were doing healing. Even though Jesus wasn't finished teaching, they were doing healing. They were radiating spiritual power. And by the way, Jesus wasn't a Christian. You know, he wasn't a Christian. He was a Jew. And he had never read the Bible. And he radiated a power that somehow got the attention of people when he walked by the fishermen. They dropped their nets because of something he radiated in silence. And they knew it was meaningful and profound. So, am I a Christian? Yes, I'm a Christian. Am I only a Christian? No. I'm not only a Christian. Okay, now I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and talk about So this is from Scientific American, and this slide shows you that in fact there are all kinds of frequencies of energy all around us. And we are not consciously aware of them. But we keep discovering new ways of capturing frequencies of energy and using it for our technology. So, you know, we have AM radio and FM radio, broadcast TV and cell phone towers. You have Wi-Fi, Bluetooth transmitters, satellite television waves, cordless phones, microwave ovens, Wi-Fi transceivers, and cell phones. And so this slide shows you some of the different powers in megahertz for the waves of energy and information in which we're embedded, but we're not consciously aware. And I invite you to investigate. Don't you think it's possible that there's lots of other frequencies that we haven't discovered yet? Way more frequencies. And that obviously our capacity to perceive these frequencies are very limited. And we're not all alike. We're not all alike. An article in the internet version of the International Journal of Neuroscience, just in July, talks about electromagnetic hypersensitivity, the evidence for a novel neurological syndrome. And a self-reported doctor said that she was extremely sensitive to electromagnetic fields. And so they tested her, and it was a double-blind situation. They put her in a field of 60 hertz electric, typical of an environmental strength electromagnetic field. And she developed temporal pain, headache, muscle twitching, and skipped heartbeats within 100 seconds after initiation of electromagnetic field exposure. She was unaware of when they would expose her and when they would turn the current on and turn it off. When they asked her, "Are you aware of the changing exposure?" No, she couldn't tell, but her symptoms were caused primarily by field transitions, on-off or off-on. In other words, the changes. And she herself had no conscious perception of the electrical field. At this point, I'll just tell you that the research with cell phones, I won't go into it hugely here, but I will say that the most damaging effects are when the frequency is being changed, when we're driving and different cell towers or different satellites are changing our cell phone connection. That's the hardest thing for the human immune system and brain to cope with, because we're designed to get stable with something and accommodated to it, and then our immune system normalizes that stage, and then when it gets changed, when the frequencies change constantly, our immune system is just taxed. And I will just say that the two closest people to me in the world have dropped their bodies. They both died of glioblastoma, Dr. Elizabeth Targ and Dr. Stephen Bauman. They both died, I believe, from use of cell phone combined with their stress. They had very stressed lives. But I'll just put that out there and leave it at that. They both have contacted me from the other side and said, yes, we're not all alike in our susceptibility to the damage from cell phones, and that the word is not out. So I just, the head researcher here, who's actually lives in Raleigh, works for the EPA, has said, the news is, try not to hold your phone beaming microwaves right into your brain. Use some sort of earpiece, because there's absolutely no doubt that we all get a hot spot in our brain from holding your cell phone near your brain. But in the research that's required by our government, that fact disappears in an epidemiological study with the general population. That's all I'll say about that. There's a website here of a guy in England who says, I'm an electromagnetic man. I suffer from electrosensitivity. It's highly sensitive to electromagnetic fields, mobile phones, microwaves, baby monitors, and the such. And he talks about his symptoms, headaches, sleep problems. I show this because this is what I suffered from after my near-death experience. Overnight, I became jangled energetically, extremely sensitive to any vibration at all. And I know that a lot of near-death experiencers are having this be their experience. And I'm here to help you not be a victim of that, but actually harness that sensitivity for being useful in the world and being healthy and being able to share what's happened to you in a way that serves everyone, including yourself. So just to summarize, we're not all the same in our sensitivity to vibration at all. Now, the science of consciousness is all about attention. Nothing can be accomplished without attention. Through attention, we receive impressions. Where you direct your attention determines what you're going to experience and what sort of impressions you're going to receive. Some impressions are stronger than others. And in the science of consciousness, one of the basic ideas of it is we need to become aware and discerning regarding which impressions we expose ourselves to. We live in a culture that's very loud and just beaming us with noise and bright lights and violence, anger, competition. But we have a choice on what impressions we expose ourselves to according to our value system. Now, people who've had near-death experiences have had their value systems radically changed. We've seen a better way humanity can be: kind, helpful, gentle. Seeing us as souls, all one. We're all equal as souls. So, for people who want to be healers, definitely the start is becoming very aware of where your attention is and where you want it to be, and be able to stabilize your attention at the frequency of vibration that you choose, because it's useful to you, it makes you feel good, you believe in it. And that's called developing your will. Developing your will is knowing what your intention is, being able to align your attention up with your intention for a duration of time with stability. We are driven by forces and laws operating at the level of consciousness where we are. Bodies obey laws of the physical world, but a higher order of laws can intervene. We are not all at the same level of consciousness at all. Although people look the same, our bodies look pretty much the same. Some of us way more than others. Some of us are taller or shorter. But we're definitely not all at the same level of consciousness. And when I learned that I was at a different level of consciousness with a whole different value system than the rest of the parapsychological scientists that I'd been working, I realized I have a whole level of perception they don't have. And they're trying to get that perception through analysis and scientific research and controlled studies. You cannot get the next level of perception, intuition, a direct perception, subtle perception of subtle energy, subtle sight, subtle perception of inner vibration. You cannot get this through thought or through intellectual study. It's an experience in consciousness. And we no longer can assume that Western science is going to work for everything because we're not all at the same level of perception. Therefore, different people doing research are not going to perceive the same outcome. And in fact, we radiate different levels of spiritual power. We radiate different frequencies of fields. And we influence the outcome of our research to different degrees. I have to rapidly go through some of the basics of this. I teach long courses in this for people, and I will be helping people later today have the direct experience of what I'm talking about. The urge for higher consciousness, or what we would call spiritual growth, is usually awakened through loss and despair. Most people who've had a near-death experience do experience a loss of their previous way of being, for sure. A loss of their previous value system, which can cause havoc in our marriages, in our families, in graduate school. And it plunged me into great despair. I considered myself a victim of being horribly oversensitive. I couldn't rest in my parents' house where I went after my near-death experience. I knew I needed taken care of. I felt that I'd had a bipolar outbreak, and I couldn't rest in their house because the noise of the furnace, which was in a corner of my parents' basement, I could hear it throughout the whole house, and it jangled me. I could hear the toaster in my bedroom with the bedroom door closed. I'm sure a lot of you have had this experience, and I'm here to share with you how to go from being a victim of hypersensitivity to being a radiatory healer. Not just an energy healer using your hands, but I'll demonstrate later today, being a radiatory healer where you can affect the vibration of all living forms from a distance. And yes, it works over the phone. I do distant healing over the phone. It's very mysterious and wonderful. Oh, sorry. Unless I recognize that I'm in darkness, there's no need for me to search. What I am or what I know must be seen to be inadequate or untrue for me to search for something more. We're not all at the same level of realizing that our sensations are not going to give us what it is we're yearning for. We're yearning for something and we don't know what it is, and we live in a culture that totally teaches that only the material realm is real. You have to be able to see it with your eyes, or it doesn't exist. But there's meaning to the changes that have happened in our near-death experiences that get us to investigate consciousness beyond matter, to feel this urge we have. The urge for higher consciousness must be nurtured with conscious attention. Not everybody's ready for this. And in fact, the science of consciousness says it's only going to be a very small percentage of people in any lifetime, in any time down here on Earth, a small percentage of people that are going to be interested in nurturing higher consciousness. Who are the people who might be interested? For sure, people initiated with near-death experiences, but also the broken-hearted. People who've had their hearts broken by loss. Now I want to just give you a few examples of how our vision, is limited. I'm not going to read this whole slide, but it's the truth about elephants. Their eyesight's very bad, but their hearing is quite sensitive. And studies have been done with elephants showing that matriarchs are able to discern the voice of over 100 other different elephants when they are a very long distance away and giving their call. It would be It would be like akin to putting 100 people behind a thick wall. How many kilometers away does it say? Anyway, how many? I can't read it, but several. And being able to discern just who it is who's saying hello to you. So when elephants are waving their ears around, they're actually like satellite dishes. They've got 2 of them. Reindeer are able, along with some other marsupials and rodents, bats, they're able to see ultraviolet light. And that's how they're able to see food and predators against a snowy backdrop. So ultraviolet light causes us to have cataracts and skin cancer. It's all around us, and it increases our risks for bad health. But there are some animals who have this perception, and it serves them quite well. More evidence for our very limited senses to perceive the vibrations that are out there. Now, 2 different professors at UC Berkeley have discovered how to make things invisible to the human eye by bending light around objects on a flat surface, on walls or on the floor at this point. Bending light so that our eyes cannot perceive the object. Now this is what evolved souls in India have been doing for thousands of years. It's written in the Indian literature that there are certain people who are able to make things invisible to our eyes and to also make us see things that aren't there. The way they do this is developing imagery in their own mind and projecting that imagery to other minds. And I have experienced this in India. This is possible for all of us. It takes a dedication. I'm not interested in psychic phenomena per se, although most people want to take remote viewing classes from me, and I do teach it, but always in context of higher conscience. In India, the concept of higher consciousness is never, ever shared without the nurturing of conscience. Higher conscience comes first. And after conscience is evolved, psychic perception comes naturally. And aren't we glad? We don't want people with undeveloped consciences to be having higher powers. Now, animals and humans, we share some of the same urges. We share some of the same emotions, the fear, prey, chase, drive, rage, curiosity. We share some of the same primary social emotions, social attachment, separation distress, sexual attraction. What we really share with animals is this primal urge to seek out novelty and what we need in life. Humans are wired for hunting and for yearning for better. We depend upon this urge to stay alive. Now, what makes humans different from animals is we have the capacity to be aware beyond our instincts, beyond our social emotions, and we have the capacity to use our intelligent mind to decide to participate in our own evolution of consciousness in this lifetime. It's our choice. The science of consciousness talks deeply about the struggle for humanity. And by the way, humanity is spoken of as a very undeveloped creature. We're definitely incomplete here in these bodies down here on the ground. These bodies are designed to be temporary, but we're not temporary. But there is a struggle in this lifetime. It's called the play of Leela, the struggle between limited vision and greater vision. And there are many levels to who we are. Some of the aspects of the I that we call ourselves, some of the eyes last longer than others and have wider perception and greater power than other aspects of ourselves. And humans have a choice on how they identify who they are, how they dedicate their attention in this lifetime for meeting their value system. Problem with a lot of us is we're not told about our choices beyond better and more sex, faster computers, more money, remodeling our house, getting into perennial gardens versus tulips. This is Pete the Peacock, who adopted me a number of years ago when I was living in Charlottesville, Virginia. He's hoping to mate with me, because he's driven by his instincts, and he doesn't know any better. That it's not going to happen with me, But we love each other. We loved each other, and we definitely had ESP. And so we humans are invited to realize there is a more pure source of energy and consciousness available to us. But we have to decide that what we're yearning for is not going to be met by better sex and more money and faster computers. And not everybody's ready. And that's okay. We're all in school here. We're in soul school. And, our job is to realize what we're doing here. What each of us is doing here. Well, the evolved souls from India have said, we're here to become conscious centers of life-giving force. And I believe that near-death experiencers have been given a glimpse of this. The next stage for humanity, as talked about in the science of consciousness, is what's called illumination. And I call it that we're invited to become Homo Illuminatus. And so some of the qualities of awakened, or let's call it evolved consciousness, beyond having developed very good analytical intelligence, is the capacity to develop our brain and our nervous system so they become capable of what's called illumination. Illumination means the ability to receive pulsations of vibrations from a source of life energy higher than physical sensations, higher than emotions or thoughts, and that humans have the capacity to radiate a healing field of peace and compassion. It's a palpable, vibrating field that I see and I can feel it, and for people taking my workshop later today, and there's still room in it, I believe, you hopefully will directly experience this. The radius of a person's heart chakra field expands and increases in power. Intuition and psychic perception are unmasked naturally. And when you become naturally psychic, you become naturally more kind. There's no way around it. Because if you're aware of your own field, you're also aware of the fields of all other living forms. And you realize we are not separated. This is not just an idea in our head. Oh, we're all one. There's no separation. This is the direct experience that the future humanity is going to live in. So for all of those of you who've become very, very sensitive to vibration and energy, it's a gift. But we have to follow a different value system than our culture. In our culture, we're victims. We can't sleep. We can't function well. But we have the capacity to direct our attention, to tune into different frequencies at will, and not be bothered by other people's anger and by the vibrations going on around us. And this is our calling. We have to. We have to. New areas of knowing, called wisdom, wider perception from a higher vantage point, more inclusive values, more conscience unfold naturally. And this is what I believe near-death experiencers have had an experience of. So all the qualities of illumination are the next phase of evolution for humanity, predicted not only by Alice Bailey in the 20s and the 30s, but for thousands of years by wisdom teachers from India. All these qualities are related to various experiences that near-death experiencers have had, including vibrational sensitivity, psychic perception, energy healing, and changes in values towards love and forgiveness and inclusiveness. What happened? Well, I didn't know what happened because in my case, I wasn't sure that I was actually near death. I had been having a horrible bad headache, and the reason I was near death was I was very on the verge of killing myself with slashing my wrists. I was locked in to a youth hostel during martial law in 1974. There was no way for me to get help. I'd had a 4-day-long awful headache. Could not bear it anymore. And so I never knew what had happened to me to change me overnight so that my energetic frequency was just changed and jangled, and I did become a healer overnight. I tell the story of how I discovered that in my first book I wrote with physicist Russell Targ, which is for sale here. But when I heard Yvonne Cason, many of you have heard her speak here at previous conferences. She wrote a great book called A Farther Shore. In her near-death experience, when she started having it, her body was fine. Nothing had happened yet. But her plane was on its way to crashing in a whiteout blizzard in northern Canada. So she definitely expected she was going to die. And that is when her near-death experience started then. And when I heard that, I went, ah, it's about the stopping of our mind. And in India, it's talked about how it's absolutely necessary for humans to have the experience of an absolute still mind and have that be happening with duration for us to be able to receive transmission of a higher vibration. We have to be available. So when we're available, there's all kinds of other frequencies we can tune ourselves to consciously that give us different information, that change what we radiate, that develop our nervous system. In the science of consciousness, it's taught the human nervous system absolutely must be prepared to withstand higher frequency vibration. I'm sure some of you with your near-death experience, as I experienced when I was in the bright light, it was so bright, I could barely deal with it. It was absolutely, it was like going to blow me apart. And it did. It blew my nervous system apart. And now I understand a little bit, I think, of what's going on. Not just saints radiate halos. All humans radiate a halo of one degree or another. And unless a person has consciously developed themselves as being able to receive, let's call it spiritual vibration or vibration from a higher source of energy, and developed the radiance that comes out of our heads, it's available. It's available. This is a lovely painting by Alex Gray. So getting zapped by the light is definitely energetically transforming. When you look at the cosmos, you can imagine that there are many frequencies out there as yet unreceived by humans, and perhaps the human physical body is not capable, the human brain not capable of tuning into all the frequencies. But we're told by wisdom teachers that we do have a job here, and the next higher frequency, yes, it's called, we are here to develop a capacity to receive. So I have not very much time here. I'm going to race through some of this. What are some of the areas of scientific research, parapsychology, that show that our nature is truly non-physical, or what's called non-local, not limited, to any one place in space or time. And I've participated in all 5 of these areas of parapsychological research. I'm happy to talk with you about it. I talk about it in my books. We have telepathy, remote viewing or clairvoyance, precognition, psychokinesis, and what we call healing or distant mental influence or influence of living systems. Another type of evidence we have that we're multidimensional beings, that we're not just physical bodies. This is a book that came out last year. I think it's wonderful. Messages by Bonnie McAneny. Signs, Visits, and Premonitions from Loved Ones Lost on 9/11. It's a very, very important book. Why? Because they're very straight people. They worked in the world of finance. If they had any spirituality at all, it was a very average type of spirituality, not mystics. They didn't believe in after-death communication. They didn't believe in precognition. Even though a lot of them were Christians, they didn't believe in any sort of life after death. Certainly didn't, they didn't. The reason this book is so important is you have large groups of people when they started comparing notes, and including children who went on and on about how their dead father came and visited them every night before they went to bed and things like this. So it's a wonderful book. What's the scientific evidence for our capacity to intentionally participate in our own evolution? The science of neuroscience, neuroplasticity, that shows that we can override our conditioning of early life, abuse, neglect. We can override our neurotransmitter feedback patterns by consciously attuning to a state of peace or helping, wanting to help or heal somebody else. And we can change our neurotransmitter feedback loop patterns in our brain as well as our brain tissue. And this slide was given to me by my colleague Michael Posner at the Psych Department of University of Oregon. This figure shows the fiber tracts that surround the anterior cingulate of a participant in which a significant change in the density and of tissue, brain tissue, induced by just 6 hours of meditation training, and not all at once. The HeartMath organization gives lots of evidence for how humans can learn to entrain their brain waves with their heart waves, you could actually say. And so I wanted to mention the HeartMath work. There's more HeartMath showing that we can override our reactions of anger or fear. We can learn to reprogram ourselves to be in gratitude or appreciation, and this affects the energy that we radiate. And as we make these changes consciously, the field of epigenetics, the book by Bruce Lipton, The Biology of Belief, is a main book about that. Epigenetics is the area showing that we're not victims of the genes that we inherited. We can affect which genes express themselves or not by our attitudes. And we're not just victims of what happens to us, because all kinds of stuff happen to us that we can't control. We're invited to be humans and use our capacity to reprogram ourselves for a better life. This is more HeartMath research showing that the human heart field, when a person has learned how to stably radiate peace and gratitude, that the actual torus shape of the human heart field starts to expand and get very, very strong. Now, this is what Ramana Maharshi demonstrated, and this is what I think a lot of near-death experiencers have experienced. Okay, so why is the skill of inward-directed, steady attention with still mind necessary for the evolution of human consciousness? This relates to how can near-death experiencers make useful our energetic sensitivity. Well, this shows that in the science of consciousness, we consist of a spectrum of interrelated and overlapping frequencies. We're not just a physical frequency. We have to nourish the energy of our spiritual self, you could say, with our attention. It can't just be an idea, oh, now I know that I'm a spiritual being having a physical experience. We have to experience it regularly because we energize with our attention the frequency that we're bringing in. We need to make real our multidimensional self by energizing our light body with our attention. We're here to realize and activate our role as conscious organs of higher consciousness. We humans are the bridges between heaven and earth. And consciousness seeks a portal through you. So, thank you for asking me to speak.